June in Normandy brought a sun that was starting to bite, mixed with the salty tang of the sea wind and the last traces of cordite still hanging in the distance. In the main square of St. Clair, shards of glass and bits of shrapnel were still wedged between the cobblestones. A few American jeeps sat crookedly at the curb, engines idling, their low rumble vibrating through the afternoon heat. Sergeant Frank Donovan, military police, jumped down from the passenger seat. His boots hit hard stone with a solid crack. He tugged his khaki blouse straight and swept the square with a gaze that moved like radar. D-Day had been 2 weeks ago, but the word liberation had a complicated texture here. Celebratory slogans were painted across walls. Rough handbills offering rewards for collaborators were pasted over them. People surged into the streets to hug American soldiers, yet behind their smiles was appraisal and a brittle urgency to prove which side of the line they stood on. His squad followed him, boys in their early 20s, including 19-year-old Private Jack Taylor, helmet strap loose, his face still carrying that mix of first battle exhilaration and inexperience. Their mission was to keep order in this crossroads town, keep the supply convoys moving, and, as the company brief put it in careful language, assist in stabilizing civilian sentiment. Donovan had been an MP for 8 years, from North Africa to Sicily. He knew what stabilizing meant. It meant drawing a fragile line between cheering and vengeance and making sure you stood inside it. The noise burst from the northeast corner of the square at the entrance to a drab, gray apartment building. It started as shouting and turned into shoving. The crowd gathered. The way iron filings find a magnet, Donovan signaled. His squad fanned out and moved in. He heard a woman's sharp, ragged crying, layered under men's furious curses. French collided with stray English words. Whore. German mattress. Shave her head. When he forced his way to the center, he saw the woman they'd surrounded, young, maybe not even 25. Her flaxen hair had been yanked into a tangle. A clear handprint stood out on her cheek. One strap of her dress had snapped and hung loose. She curled in on herself, trying to cover her head and chest. Several men were dragging at her arms, some townsmen in work trousers, and 2 members of the resistance with FFI armbands. An old woman held a bucket of dark paint like she could barely contain herself. A rusted pair of scissors lay on the ground. Stop. Donovan's voice wasn't loud, but it had the hard, unquestionable weight of the provost. He stepped forward and put himself between the woman and the men pulling her. U.S. military police, back up. The crowd fell quiet for a beat, then surged louder. One of the FFI men, his face flushed, chopped the air with his arm. She's a collaborator. She slept with a German officer. This is French business. You Americans stay out of it. This town is under U.S. military control, Donovan said, eyes locked on the man's. His hand rested on his holster, but the strap stayed closed. Any punishment goes through official procedure. I'll say it again. Step back, disperse. Procedure, that was his anchor. In Algiers, in Naples, he had seen too much violence baptized as justice in a single fevered moment. His job was not to decide who had collaborated. That was for the OSS and the French courts that would follow. His job was to keep violence from happening, or at least keep it from happening in front of him in the street in a frenzy that could not be put back in its bottle once it spilled. He looked to Jack and the others. The squad stepped forward and tried to form a barrier with their bodies. But the June air in Normandy was thick with pressure that had finally been released, and with humiliation that demanded an outlet. The pushing started. A broad-shouldered townsperson slammed into an MP named Tom, who had moved to block him, and Tom staggered. The old woman seized the moment and threw the paint. Thick black liquid splashed across the cobblestones and spattered Donovan's trouser leg and the young woman's bare calf. Crying and shouting, and the soldiers' barked orders tangled together. "Pull them back! Get the woman out of here!" Donovan snapped at Jack. Donovan himself shoved an arm up to block a man trying to slip past and grab the woman's hair. The scene teetered on the edge of a full collapse. That was when a shadow flew in from the outer ring of the crowd. Donovan heard it cut the air and instinctively turned his head. The fist-sized stone was not meant for him. It arced low and struck the rim of Jack Taylor's helmet as Jack bent to help the woman up. A dull clang rang out, not especially loud, yet the air around them seemed to freeze for a fraction of a second. Jack didn't even cry out. His body went slack as if the bones had been pulled out. He dropped to one knee, then rolled sideways and collapsed. Blood started seeping at once from beneath the helmet's edge, running down his young face, tracing a bright red line through the dust on his cheekbone. Time stretched. Donovan saw Tom lunge in to catch Jack. He saw the anger flare across his men's faces like a match. He saw the skinny young man who had thrown the rock flash panic, then harden his expression into a mask of defiance. He saw the crowd recoil half a step from the blood, but all of it came through a cold film as if he were watching from behind glass. The first thing in his mind was not emotion. It was a flat assessment. Soldier injured, non-combat casualty, conflict escalated. "Medic!" he shouted, his voice ripping over everything else. Two men with Red Cross armbands pushed through. Donovan forced his gaze away from Jack's bleeding face and onto his own soldiers, whose eyes were starting to burn. Tom's thumb had already popped the holster strap. Another MP's knuckles were white, his stare fixed on the crowd, on the direction the stone had come from. The air was full of powder, waiting for a spark. Donovan spun and stepped right into Tom's space, nearly nose to nose, and growled in a voice only their tight circle could hear, each word squeezed out like it hurt. "Holster it. Now. All of you hold the line. You want a court-martial. You want to hang for shooting civilians." Tom's face twisted, his chest heaving. But the rank on Donovan's sleeve and 8 years of hard authority in Donovan's ice-blue stare did their work. Tom's hand eased away from the pistol. Donovan cut his eyes across the rest. "Control the perimeter. Isolate the area. You and you get the woman onto the jeep. Now." The orders hit his men like a blunt tool, severing the instinct to strike back and replacing it with discipline that felt rigid and angry. The MPs reset as a human wall. No bayonets, but their faces were colder than steel. The townspeople and the FFI men, shocked and suddenly aware of the optics of American blood on the stones, were pushed back, step by reluctant step. The skinny youth tried to melt away, but two MPs grabbed him and held him tight. Donovan did not look at the woman, trembling and sobbing, later identified as Eloise. All his attention went to Jack. The medics wrapped his head. The bleeding slowed. Jack's eyes were unfocused. He vomited once. Mild concussion, likely worse. When the stretcher arrived, Donovan patted Jack's uninjured shoulder and said nothing. He did not need to. The flicker in Jack's eyes, pain and confusion together, and the silent stare of the other soldiers was pressure enough. The jeep carrying Jack and Eloise drove out of the square, leaving behind a crowd that slowly scattered into murmurs and a ground smeared with paint, broken stone, and an enemy silence that did not need words. Donovan stood in the center of the square. The afternoon sun cast long shadows of him and his men. Tom came up beside him, voice dry. "Sergeant, Jack, he'll be fine," Donovan cut in, his tone empty of emotion. "Clean the scene. Get names on everyone involved, especially the one who threw the rock. Put it in the report." "Yes, Sergeant." Tom hesitated, lowering his voice. "Those French bastards. They almost killed Jack." Donovan finally turned and looked at him, and at the others listening. "I know," he said evenly, but under the calm, something ground like teeth. "That's why we're MPs, not a mob. Go do your job." He walked back toward his jeep and did not climb in right away. He lit a cigarette. His hand was steady, but he drew too hard on the first drag and coughed. Across the square, a curtain moved on the second floor of a building. Farther off, on the road toward Caen, 10-wheel trucks roared past in a constant stream, raising dust, the huge, indifferent stride of the war. Here, in the small town of St. Clair, he had stopped what might have become a public shaving and beating, possibly worse, and in doing it, he had gotten an American soldier's head split open. His professional instincts screamed this was not an incident that would be filed away as a minor disturbance. Blood, especially American blood, changed the rules, the captain's office, an MP investigation file, a career evaluation sheet. The bureaucratic machinery, abstract and unstoppable, already felt like a net dropping over him. He crushed the cigarette under his boot. Black paint flecks on his trouser leg looked like an ugly brand. The price of holding the line of procedure had arrived in a bright, specific red, and it was only the beginning. The MP's temporary post in St. Clair was set up in an abandoned boys' school on the edge of town. The hallways still smelled of chalk dust and old wood, but the walls were now plastered with English signs and tactical maps. When Donovan returned near dusk, the barracks were unusually quiet. No cards slapping down, no broken jazz from the radio. Jack's bunk was empty, his blanket was folded square, his helmet sat neatly on the pillow. Beside it lay a letter home with only the first lines written. The other soldiers sat or lay on their cots. No one talked. Tom sat in a corner and cleaned his pistol parts, the metal clicks sharp in the silence. When Donovan walked in, several pairs of eyes flicked to him and then away, as if touching something hot. The air had a thick, unspoken accusation in it, mixed with worry about Jack and, deeper, a sense of betrayal that none of them could quite put into uniform language. Why are we bleeding to protect that kind of woman? Donovan acted as if he did not notice. He went to his small desk and began to write the incident report. He used the driest language possible, the kind that fit regulations: injury and medical disposition of Private Jack Taylor, temporary detention of a suspected stone thrower. He left out the feverish hatred in the townspeople's eyes. He left out the stench of the paint. He left out the cold spasm in his own gut when Jack went down. The report was for the system, and the system digested facts. It did not absorb feelings. When he signed his name at the bottom, it felt like signing the first page of an indictment against himself. The summons came the next morning. Company headquarters was set up a few miles away in a manor house that had survived intact. Donovan walked there. Mud clung to his boots. His pace stayed even, each step like tamping down a decision. Major McCarthy's office had once been the manor's library. Tall shelves stood half empty, the remaining hardcovers coated with dust. McCarthy himself was by the map table with his back to the door. When he heard the report, he turned. He was a career soldier in his 50s, cheeks hollow, eyes like a calibrated rangefinder, able to convert any event into risk and trouble. Sergeant Donovan? McCarthy did not offer a chair. He did not waste a word. The St. Clair Square incident. I read your report. Brief. Now tell me, in your own words, why? Donovan straightened. Sir, the situation was about to become physical violence against a civilian female, potentially escalating to fatal injury. Military police duties require maintaining order in liberated areas and preventing illegal acts of violence. My intervention was intended to control the situation and separate the parties. Control the situation. McCarthy repeated the phrase and moved behind his desk, tapping a finger on the wood. The outcome is an American soldier, Private Jack Taylor, head trauma, concussion, now evacuated to a field hospital. The outcome is dozens of local civilians, including members of the French Forces of the Interior, strongly resentful of our interference in what they call internal affairs. 2 town council representatives have already raised an informal protest through the French liaison, questioning our authority. The outcome is you, an experienced MP sergeant, failing to anticipate risk resulting in injury and potentially unnecessary friction with local forces. Each outcome landed like a precisely swung hammer. Donovan felt his throat dry. Sir, the situation changed in seconds. A thrown rock is an individual act that cannot be predicted. My primary concern was preventing what could have become murder. Murder. McCarthy's mouth pulled down, not a smile. Sergeant Donovan, this is France. For 4 years, The things that happened here every day, judged by our laws and our moral standards, would fill how many special tribunals? You think they're playing at children's games now. That is a purge. War continuing by other means. And we, he paused, eyes sharp, are outsiders. Our priority is basic order, open roads, unit security, and, as much as possible, staying out of trouble. We are not here to play guardian angel for every potential victim, especially when playing guardian angel requires our soldiers to bleed. The room smelled of old mildew and cold administrative logic. Donovan tried to hold to the center. So, sir, you're telling me that if violence is about to happen in the street, we should look away until it becomes a body and then open an investigation. McCarthy sat at last and folded his hands on the desk. I'm telling you to weigh costs. Every decision has a price. Your decision cost a soldier's health, this company's standing, and an already fragile relationship with local power. You showed good intentions and poor judgment. You put your personal insistence on proper procedure ahead of realistic assessment of your men's safety and the mission's risk profile. Personal insistence. The phrase hit Donovan with a sharp, absurd pain. He had believed it was professional instinct, the rules internalized. In McCarthy's framing, it was a kind of stubborn vanity, a failure to read the world he was operating in. Therefore, McCarthy said, his tone shifting into formal pronouncement, based on your command error in this incident and the potential negative impact on relations with local forces, the following measures are imposed. 1, a written reprimand to be entered into your service record. 2, effective immediately, you are reassigned out of the St. Clair town center and the hub patrol detail. Donovan's heart tightened as if gripped by a cold hand. His voice came out steady anyway. Reassigned where, sir? 5 miles north, the old farm sector, the 14th temporary prisoner of war enclosure. McCarthy slid a transfer order across the desk. They need an MPNCO to manage internal order and daily administration. A small number of recently captured German stragglers. Routine. It's an opportunity to get away from trouble and reconsider what discipline means. A POW enclosure, a backwater in the military system, close to exile. No cheering civilians, no complicated purges, just wire silent enemies and day after day of dull watchfulness. His career on the edge of what might have been a promotion track had been yanked onto a narrow gray side road. Yes, sir. Donovan took the paper. The coarse grain of it scratched his fingertips. He did not argue. In McCarthy's value system, the argument was already over. Blood was hard currency, and Donovan had used it to pay a price that no one was willing to call justified. The walk back to the post felt longer. The sunlight was bright over fields torn by tank treads. In the distance, farmers tried to patch broken fences. The war moved forward, and he was being left behind, trapped in a story where he was punished for interfering. When he stepped into the barracks, the atmosphere went tighter. Word of the transfer had traveled faster than any vehicle. Tom looked at him, seemed about to speak, then only nodded and turned back to packing gear. Another soldier, usually talkative, focused intensely on polishing his boots, as if it were the most important work on earth. Jack's bunk stayed empty, a quiet accusation. That afternoon, Donovan went to the field hospital. Jack lay on a cot with his head wrapped in bandages, face pale but eyes clearer. When he saw Donovan, he tried to sit up. "Stay down, Taylor." Donovan pressed him gently back and pulled up a chair. "How do you feel?" "Still dizzy, sir." "Nausea's better." Jack's voice was weak. "Doc says I got lucky. Angle was off a little." Donovan nodded and then had nothing that fit. At last he said, "Rest. Don't worry about the company." Jack was quiet for a moment. His eyes drifted, then he asked in a low voice, "Sergeant, that French woman, what happened to her?" Donovan blinked. He had not expected the question. "Placed in temporary custody. She'll be turned over to the French authorities." Jack stared at his hands on the blanket. "When I went down, I saw her looking at me like she was scared." He paused again, then added, almost reluctantly, "It's not really worth it, is it, for her?" The words were soft, but they slid under Donovan's skin like a needle. He did not answer. He only patted Jack's shoulder, stood, and said, "Get well, soldier." When he left the hospital tents, the evening wind carried disinfectant and the sour undertone of wounds. As he headed for his bicycle, he ran into the company intelligence NCO, a thin man in glasses carrying a stack of papers at a hurry. "Hey, Frank," the NCO said, glancing around and dropping his voice. "About that St. Clair thing, that woman, Eloise." Donovan stopped, alert. "What about her?" "OSS has a few scraps that don't match what the local underground passed along." The NCO pushed his glasses up, talking fast like he was sharing gossip that had no official weight. "She wasn't just involved with one German officer. There's an unconfirmed story, that last fall when the Gestapo hit a resistance cell nearby, they may have gotten a hint from her about a safe house. Could have been coercion, stick and carrot, you know how it goes. But the result is 3 from that cell were arrested and later died in a prison in Rouen." He shrugged. "Gray. It's all gray, and nobody is going to dig too hard. There are too many dirty accounts like that. But you went in hard for her. I figured you should know." He slapped Donovan's arm lightly and walked on. Donovan stood where he was. The bicycle handlebar went cold under his palm. All those uncertain words assembled into a picture clear enough to shatter the last intact support in his chest. He had told himself at least that he had protected a victim, someone who might have made mistakes but did not deserve a street punishment. That thin sense of moral footing had been the light he used to endure the major's condemnation, the men's silent resentment, the derailment of his path. Now someone was telling him that light might have been burning from a dirty candle, wax dripping with other people's blood. Night came down fully. Donovan did not go back to the barracks right away. He walked behind the school to a neglected playground and sat on the rusted base of a horizontal bar. He lit another cigarette. In the dark, the ember pulsed. On the road beyond, convoy lights moved like a stream of stars, heading toward the front. Out there, the enemy was clear. Sacrifice made a kind of sense. Here, behind him in the silent barracks, in the transfer paper in his pocket, in the intelligence NCO's low voice, everything was mud. The woman he had protected might have been involved in the deaths of 3 resistance fighters. His decision had put a soldier in a hospital bed. His commander had condemned his judgment. His men had turned away from him. Every cost, blood, and career and relationships had lost its noble landing point and turned absurd. Jack's pale face came back to him with the quiet question, "Not really worth it, is it?" Tom's eyes sliding away, McCarthy's cold phrase, personal insistence. A wave of doubt rose hard enough to choke him. What was he insisting on? A set of procedural rules that seemed paper-thin in the face of hatred and war, and even those rules, the person he had defended might not have been the kind of innocent those rules were meant to shelter. The cigarette burned down to his fingers. He dropped it and watched it die in the dirt. He looked up. The sky was deep blue, the stars faint. There was no answer, only a heavy emptiness. He felt a loneliness he had never known, not just the isolation from his men, but the sense that his own belief had abandoned him. The line was still there. He still believed public violence was wrong, but everything that had supported his willingness to hold that line, professional pride, moral certainty, the approval of his unit, had been hollowed out in a single day. All that remained was a bare, almost foolish should, and for that should he had already paid too much and might pay more. He rose, legs numb. Tomorrow he would go to the POW enclosure, a place built to hold enemies. Maybe the rules would be simpler there, or maybe they would be harsher. He did not know whether he could find a reason for should or whether he was heading toward the final barren stretch of his career and his faith. The 14th temporary prisoner of war enclosure sat on an open slope that had once been pasture land for a farm. The view was wide. You could see the road winding away, and beyond it the church spire of St. Clair, a sharp detail that now felt like a decoration from another life. Long corrugated metal huts formed a rectangle. Double rows of barbed wire enclosed the perimeter. Guard towers stood on the corners, machine guns mounted, though most days the sentries up there only smoked and watched the horizon. About 200 German prisoners were held here, mostly infantry captured in the later broken stages of the Normandy fighting, with a few Luftwaffe and armored troops mixed in. They wore ragged field gray uniforms. Many carried wounds. Their eyes held fatigue, confusion, and a caution that had not fully drained out. Donovan's arrival caused no stir. The guards were a mixed unit with mediocre morale. This assignment was considered warehouse duty, dull and thankless. The officer in charge, an older lieutenant, glanced at the transfer order, nodded with routine indifference, and pointed toward a small wooden hut used as the MP office. "Your space, Sergeant. Regulations are on the desk. Keep it by the book. No trouble, no dead bodies, reports on time. Any questions?" "No, sir," Donovan said. "Rules, reports, no trouble." The world here shrank into a few simple objectives. He put his limited personal belongings in the hut: a cot, a desk, a metal file cabinet. The wall was bare, except for a yellowing summary sheet on prisoner treatment under the Geneva Convention, its corners curled. He sat down and opened the handover files: prisoner roster, medical log, supply distribution list, guard rotation schedule, depersonalized order that brought him a strange kind of relief. There were no murky moral knots here, only black and white clauses. Prisoners were to receive basic food, medical care, no abuse, limited labor. Guards were to prevent escape and keep internal discipline. Conflict might happen, but its shape was clear: custodian and captive, guard and prisoner. For the first few days, Donovan operated like a recalibrated machine, strict to procedure. Every morning he supervised roll call, verified head count, inspected hut sanitation. He monitored the ration issue against standards and personally spot-checked bread weight and soup thickness. He inspected the makeshift infirmary, making sure the seriously wounded were evacuated and the minor injuries had bandages. In the afternoon, he assigned able-bodied prisoners to repair work under guard and recorded their hours. Everything had a form. Everything required a signature. At first, the guards were surprised by his rigidity. This was not the front line. Many rules had worn thin with time. Some older soldiers shoved prisoners around, pocketed a few cigarettes or a can of food. As long as it did not go too far, officers looked away. Donovan's arrival was like a clarifying agent dropped into dirty water. The first confrontation came on a wet afternoon after rain. 2 guards supervising prisoners patching a roof were veterans of the beach fighting. A young German prisoner moved slowly. The guards started with loud insults. Then one of them, a corporal, jabbed the prisoner with a rifle butt, knocking him off the ladder. The prisoner hit the ground and twisted his ankle badly. He lay there groaning. The other prisoners stopped working and watched in silence, anger packed behind their eyes. When Donovan arrived, the corporal was still cursing. "Lazy bastard, quit faking it." "What happened?" Donovan's voice stayed calm, but it carried over the steady drip of rainwater off the hut roof. "This kid's dragging his feet, Sergeant. Gave him a little lesson," the corporal said, dismissive. Donovan did not look at the guard first. He crouched to check the prisoner's ankle, then waved the medic over. "Take him to the infirmary," he said in German, the pronunciation stiff but clear. Then he stood and faced the corporal and the other guards gathering nearby. "Name?" "Serial." Donovan's eyes stayed on the corporal. The corporal blinked, then gave it. "You accuse the prisoner of malingering. Do you have a written record or witness statement? Did you annotate today's labor assignment and performance sheet?" Donovan asked. "This hell, everybody saw it," the corporal snapped. "I didn't see it," Donovan said. What I saw is you using a rifle butt as punishment and injuring a prisoner protected under the Geneva Convention." Under Army regulations and this enclosure's rules, disciplinary measures are limited to warnings, extra labor, or isolation. Physical punishment is prohibited. Your conduct is a violation and could support a war crimes allegation. War crimes! The corporal's face reddened. Several guards beside him bristled. For a damn German! Sergeant, these bastards were shooting at us months ago. That was months ago, Donovan said. His gaze moved across the others. Now they're prisoners. Our job is custody, not abuse. If you don't like the rules here, request transfer back to the front. But while you're here, you follow the rules. He paused, and the phrase he had used in St. Clair returned now with a colder, heavier weight. Or you want to be charged and tried. You want a court-martial. The air went still. War crimes and court-martial spoken in a rear area enclosure carried an unexpected force. They were not abstract words. They meant the military justice system, permanent records, careers, ending in ruin. You're suspended from guard duty for 2 days, Donovan told the corporal. Submit a written incident statement. Then to the rest, this goes on record. Remember this. The rules aren't here to protect them first. They're here to protect us, to keep us from becoming animals. Dismissed. The group broke apart, grumbling under their breath, but reined in. Donovan stood in the rain. Water soaked his shoulder patches. He felt no thrill in exercising authority, only a deep fatigue and a clear understanding. Here, the reason for enforcing rules had nothing to do with saving someone worthy, and nothing to do with moral superiority. It was simply because they were rules. They were the only handrail in the chaos, the only barrier keeping him and his men from sliding into something darker. He had paid in blood and career and trust to hold that barrier once. That made him understand how fragile it was and why it mattered. Days passed like dew forming and dripping from the barbed wire. Donovan became a silent, steady presence in the enclosure. He remained strict, but the guards began to see that strictness produced something almost like fairness, and more importantly, predictability. The prisoners saw it too. Beatings and petty theft declined. Basic rights held more consistently. Enemy and guards still faced each other across a gulf of hatred, but a minimum order settled in, built on cold regulation. Occasionally, Donovan spoke with a German sergeant major who knew some English about management matters. Both men kept stiff courtesy. They did not talk about the war. They talked about rations, work hours, sanitation. In those short exchanges, Donovan sometimes caught a flicker of confusion in the German's eyes, as if he could not understand why this American MP insisted on these formalities. One evening after his rounds, Donovan did not go straight back to his hut. He climbed the northwest guard tower, the one left mostly unused. The sun was dropping, turning the fields, the distant tree line, and the winding road into warm gold and red. St. Clair's church spire was only a dark silhouette now. The wind carried the smell of grass and wet soil and the faint thud of heavy trucks far off. The war was still moving west and east toward Germany. Out there were grand strategies, decisive battles, victories that would be written into history. He was fixed on this slope, watching a group of defeated enemies and maintaining a set of small, tedious procedures. McCarthy's phrase came back, personal insistence, Jack's pale face and not worth it, the intelligence, NCO's quiet, gray as all gray. The anger and humiliation and doubt that had burned him had not vanished. They had sunk and settled, covered by something firmer. In St. Clair, when he enforced procedure, part of him had been waiting for recognition from the system, from his unit, from his own sense of righteousness. When recognition did not come, and only punishment and suspicion did, his world had nearly collapsed. Here, in the POW enclosure, recognition had never existed. Guards saw him as a nuisance. Prisoners saw him as an inevitable custodian. His superiors only wanted no trouble. He enforced roll call, checked rations, stopped abuse, not for anyone's gratitude, not for anyone's understanding, not even for a clean moral result. These were enemy soldiers. He did it only because, as an MP, it was the one correct thing he knew how to do, correct stripped of its halo and its audience, leaving a stubborn, plain core. Follow the rules, draw a line in the mud of human nature, thin but not to be crossed. The line could not guarantee justice. It could not bring back the dead. It could not wash away a collaborator's stain. It could not make a thrown stone fly backward. All it could do was keep things from getting worse within the small space it marked. Between absolute chaos and relative order, it secured a sliver of relative. And to secure that sliver sometimes required paying in blood, in career, in loneliness. Donovan had paid, and because he had paid, he knew the price was not meaningless. The price measured the reality of the line and how costly it was to keep. The sun dropped below the horizon. The sky went purple at the edge. Lamps flickered on inside the enclosure, dim points in the dark. Below him, a guard shift changed. Prisoners were marched back into the huts. Everything moved in order, tiny as dust in the war's vast picture, yet complete in itself. Donovan climbed down and walked back with an even pace. In his hut, a kerosene lamp was burning. On the desk lay the daily report forms waiting. He sat, uncapped his pen, and began filling them out line by line. His handwriting was neat and exact. Outside, darkness fully settled, and then stars began to show, cold and distant and steady. Under that starlight, the war would end someday, whether by victory or defeat, and the noise would die. But some things would remain in the quiet afterward, not heroic epics, not moral verdicts. Things like this: reports filed in plain ink, head counts taken by rule, the flat phrase, according to regulations, spoken in moments where it would have been easier to become something else. They were the crude but vital rafts people built to keep themselves afloat in the flood. Steering such a raft required no flags and no applause. It required only what he was doing now, in the dim lamplight, calm and stubborn, recording one more ordinary day in which nothing happened. That was the answer he had found, and that was the period he set quietly on his own part in the war.